What's happening, everybody? Welcome in. My name's Jason Priester, the ClemsonInsider.com. Hope all you fellas out there who are dads had a very happy Father's Day. We had a pretty good day around here ourselves. Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsors, A Glass. For all your auto glass needs, they do replacement, they do repair. 2 locations in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. Michael, Stan, all those guys over there, man, they've been in business a very long time. They'll take care of all your auto glass needs. You can get yourself a free quote today, myaglass.com. Well, we're in the middle of June. That means a bunch of, recruiting targets are nearing decision days. Clemson's got several that are expected to make decisions here in the next, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, depending on which guy you're talking about. Heck, there was some news today that one guy, Dre Quinn, has pushed his commitment date back. Hey, I didn't even know he had set one. So that was kind of news to me. He was one of a couple of defensive ends on hand for the big official visit weekend back to start of June, but still several guys out there that they're still waiting on decisions on. A couple of the bigger names are 5-star linebacker Tyler Atkinson, 5-star safety Joy O'Brien. If depending on which recruiting service you look at, 5-star defensive lineman Bryce Perry Wright. Quinn's one they're still waiting on, who's probably going to make a decision sometimes in the next couple of weeks. Several more of those guys, cornerback Danny Odom and a handful more. Right now, you've got a class that's ranked inside the top 5. Highly unlikely it stays that way. I just don't think they're going to, end up with enough guys in the class. When you start comparing, the numbers to what some of these other schools are going to end up signing, and quantity always plays a big part in that. I think as long as you're somewhere inside the top 15, you're pretty good. Eric Bakich continues to retool his roster, man. He has made several moves since we all gathered here a week ago. Some of these I like more so than the ones that had been made up to this point last week. He has went out and done what he can to add some pop back into that lineup. Guys like Ty Malley, a 3-year starter at Mercer, never hit less than 18 home runs. A guy like Ryan Wyman, who's going to get you double digit in homers. He's got the kid from Georgia, the Clavon kid, who it's a small sample size. He hadn't done a lot. He didn't play much at Georgia as a freshman. But if you dig into him, he was one of the top shortstops in the country coming out of high school. The Nate Savoy kid, the last one that committed late last week, I think it was, maybe the 12th. He hit 20 home runs last year with Loyola Marymount. Got an interesting story, that guy, man. He had a really rough go of it in high school. He had 2 stress fractures in his back, was out like 16 months, I think he said it was. Tries to come back, has to go back out again, misses another large chunk of time, so his options were kind of limited coming out of high school. That's how he ends up at LMU to begin with. Kills it there this year and jumps in the portal, wants to play on a bigger stage. I got just one question, though, man. Where's the arms? I'm still waiting on some arms to be added to this thing. They've added 2. I mean, let's don't act like they haven't added any. And let me also add this. I'll be shocked if Weidman ever makes it to campus. But where are the arms, man? They got the guy from Alabama. He appeared in 5 games. He's got more walks than innings pitched. And they have the Simerson kid that they got from Catawba, who's not even a Division I school. Great numbers, man. He's got great numbers. And even if he lives up to those numbers at Clemson, I still think you need at least 2 more. You actually lose a pitcher in the portal, two of them actually, that you were probably planning to lean on heavily next year, and Ethan Darden and TP Wentworth. You got to do something to replace those guys. So I don't think they're quite done yet. We'll see what they end up, doing here over the next week, or actually couple weeks. Still got another couple weeks left to go, but you like to think they're not done anyways. Let's put it that way. And it's always worth noting that, just because you go after guys don't mean you're going to land them. Can get tricky with some of these pitchers in baseball. But we can take it wherever you want to go, man. We can talk recruiting, we can talk portal baseball and the portal stuff, whatever it may be. Just drop your questions in the comments, and I shall get to them. Just let me throw this out there one more time. It will not be instantaneously. You have to give me time to get down to them. I take them as they come, first serve. Kind of go through them that way. So sometimes it might take me a few minutes to get to them, maybe even 10 or 15. So if you want me to get to it, stick with me. And I promise, if it's a legit question, I will get to it. Recruiting right off the bat is Dre Quinn, a Texas lean after his visit. He was supposed to commit Tuesday and now visiting Notre Dame this weekend. Yeah, I didn't, I saw that story from 24/7 earlier about his commitment date getting pushed back. And I was thinking to myself, I don't even remember this guy setting a commitment date. So I go search his Twitter, and I don't really see one. He never told me anything about a commitment date in the times I've talked to him, even though that's been a few weeks ago, to be totally honest. But maybe that's something he told somebody behind a paywall. I don't know. So I wasn't even expecting him to commit, tomorrow. But yeah, he was at Texas this weekend. So was Bryce Perry Wright, for that matter. And I actually, reached out to somebody over there this morning, and I asked him about Perry Wright and Quinn, and the conversation quickly turned to Quinn, and it sounds like they're starting to sweat a little bit over him after the Texas visit. But the longer this thing stretches out, the better it probably is for Clemson, particularly if he follows through and takes this Notre Dame visit, which it sounds like he's going to do. Because a lot of these kids, can suffer from what I like to call visit highs, coming fresh off of a visit, particularly in the day or two after that visit. I remember I caught Jay Lamar on a visit high when he visited Clemson back in the spring. These guys are always going to be extremely high most of the time anyways on the school they visited last. Kind of got to let that emotion settle. And if you're Clemson, you absolutely hope that's the case here with some of the stuff you're seeing about Quinn in Texas today. So I don't know if I would, I hate to use the word lean at this point, man, because a lot of times it can change from week to week. But let's just say that Texas may have very well thrown a wrench into this thing. And if you're Clemson, right now you're kind of sitting at one commitment with the Hardrick kid. And like I said last week, I'm starting to count Perry Wright as a defensive end too, because it sounds like that's where he's going to play if he gets to Clemson, at least to begin with. So if you can land Perry Wright and you already got Hardrick on board, that depending on, if you take a third and who that is, assuming you miss on Quinn, then we can judge it then. But Quinn's a guy that I thought, especially based off what I was told last weekend when I was in Clemson for camp, Clemson felt pretty good about their chances with him, at least at that point. But we just have to, I know people probably get tired of hearing me say it, but you just got to let these guys get through these visits and see how it plays out. I do think Clemson is starting to sweat a little bit over this one, though. Bakich done in the portal. I surely would hope not. You lose a guy like Darden. You lose a guy like Wentworth, who I'm sure, they were expecting to take a chance. I think Wentworth is a big loss, man, a big one. But when you start taking as many outfielders that they've taken into portal with 3 years of eligibility left, you only got so many outfield spots, man. I was the night before Wentworth announced, man. Me and a buddy of mine were talking, and we were talking about how we wouldn't be surprised if we saw a guy like Wentworth or even Crichton um, jump into portal, or maybe even a guy like Castellani, just due to some of the moves that Bakich has made. But that's kind of the risk you take when you start, retooling your roster in the way he's going about doing it. Yeah, I think you've got to. To me, I think you got to add a couple more arms, minimum. You can go back to several years, even before Bakich got to Clemson. To pitchers, there's always somebody that has an injury, and typically there's several. So you can't bank on guys staying healthy. Can't bank on Dane Moeller being ready to go day one. You might not get him back, heck, to late March, early April ACC play. Especially if he's on the same kind of time, if he follows the same kind of timeline that Talon Bell followed, and they definitely aren't going to rush that guy back. So who's your starters next year? You got, obviously you got Canuck. You would hope Talon Bell kind of gets caught up over the offseason, has a good, strong summer, develops out pitch, and he becomes one of those weekend starters that you can depend on. He's got stuff. I think people lose sight of the fact how far behind he was when he finally debuted this year due to his Tommy John. Who's your number 3 starter when the season starts? Yeah. I don't. Is anybody comfortable in saying it's going to be that kid from Alabama? I'm not. Is anybody comfortable saying, look, Wernick's finally going to be ready to start, day one next year? I'm not. I mean, you need some insurance there. I would, for me personally, I'd like to see him go out and land a starter and another big time reliever. You can never have too much depth, and even then, that won't give them an abundance of depth. So I would hope that they still have another move or two to make. I really believe Clemson is going to have a hard time landing Tyler Atkinson. What gets me, there isn't a backup plan yet. Thoughts? On the surface, it probably appears there's no backup plan. I guarantee you there is. But yeah, I absolutely understand the way they have gone about recruiting him, 100%. If you're going to land that guy, you got to make him feel like the priority, man. You got to show him that it's, it's not just lip service when people say it's different at Clemson and they go about doing things differently. Like a guy like Peyton Houston said last week, they do all the right things when it comes to the recruiting process. Atkinson told me himself coming off that visit, that he couldn't believe the way he felt like a priority there because he was the only linebacker on hand. So you can absolutely, it's not just lip service. Again, you prove that he's the priority with your actions. But we're also not talking about a guy that's going to, stretch this thing out into late summer, into the fall. He's going to make a decision, probably not too long after he wraps up all his officials. And then if you don't land him, you go back, you start going to guys, behind him on the board. And just because a guy doesn't have an offer doesn't mean Clemson hasn't been recruiting them. There's a lot of different ways you can do this thing. Just because a guy doesn't have an offer doesn't mean they haven't been in contact with some guys. I'm kind of hoarse tonight. So that doesn't really concern me all that much. Did a recent offer go out for another 2026 recruit? Off the top of my head, I don't remember one. So don't hold me to that. There's been several here in the past week. They offered a 2027 tight end today, but I don't remember a 2026 guy that got one. I'm not 100% on that, but I don't remember one. TP Wentworth exit thoughts with Ethan Darden leaving. Are these concerning portal losses? I hated to see Wentworth enter the portal. I think he's got the makeup to be a star at the college level. I kind of made a comparison, not necessarily in the types of player they are, but maybe the kind of impact he could have. I made a comparison to Caden Grice a few weeks ago because I think he's got that kind of upside. That might end up being one that stings. And if you don't add a couple more arms, then yeah, losing Darden's going to sting too. Because you certainly can't depend on, a freshman coming in and being ready to start day one, although it's happened, I can't remember if it happened in Bakich's first season or not, but it happened in his second and it happened in his third. So I mean, maybe that ends up happening again, but I surely wouldn't, be sitting there right now today banking on that to happen, particularly since you hadn't even gotten to fall ball yet. So I mean, I hated to see Wentworth leave, but again, I had a feeling somebody was going to, just based off of the guys that they've added. There's only so many outfield spots, at a certain point, especially when you're bringing in guys that just finished their freshman year. Wentworth just finished his freshman year. I mean, if those guys they're bringing in, they are not coming in to ride the pine. If you're a guy like Wentworth, that's probably the way you got to view it. So he just seems like there was going to be an odd man out, and that looks like it's him. It's going to be interesting to see what they do with Crichton next year, particularly if they go with, Gaffney as the everyday first baseman. Who plays third? Is it Castellani or one of the transfers? I mean, there's a lot of questions right now, man, but it's a lot of offensive production he's brought in. I lean heavily towards thinking Wyman probably never makes it to campus, but let's say he does. That's even one more outfielder. So I can certainly understand it. We've talked about Darden ad nauseum. I actually was not surprised at all about Darden entering the portal. I had kind of gotten a heads up on that a few weeks ago, but he's not one of those flashy, overpowering guys. But when he's healthy, he's been pretty solid. He had some bad numbers over the, about a month stretch there before he went out with his injury, and he was trying to pitch through that injury before he started dealing with that thing, man. He had been pretty good. So, yeah, I think those are big losses. Absolutely. Particularly from the pitching aspect. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can replace TP's bat. At least on the surface, you can replace his bat and his defense with some of the guys you've added. But, man, he's a two-way guy. I think he was going to be a key reliever next year. So you got to find a way to replace that. Does having a lone recruit over the weekend help Clemson reel him in? You can devote more one-on-one time to him. He's talking about defensive tackle Keyshawn Stats, who took his official visit this weekend. He didn't officially get his offer until, I don't remember, 2-3 weeks ago, even though Clemson had been on him hard for a while now. They made an exception with him so he could take his official visit this weekend instead of the first weekend in June because he already had some other visits lined up already. Kind of like the same thing they were going to do with Fletcher Turk before they got full, at offensive line. But, I mean, when you can devote that kind of one-on-one attention to a guy on an official visit all weekend long, it certainly doesn't hurt. Stansel's a guy I think Clemson's been in pretty good shape with going back, for a bit now, probably, definitely before this weekend. And he's another guy I wouldn't expect his to stretch out much longer. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't end up being a part of the class at some point, to be honest. But I'd have said that before this weekend, too. Hope EB can get these guys positioned right. I don't believe any can play 3 different positions. Took too long to figure out right field. I think there's 3 of them that can play both corner outfield spots. I think it was Dally who told me he's coming to play right field. I talked to all of them pretty much. I can't keep what they told. I can't keep what each one told me straight, so don't hold me to that. But I think it was Dally that told me he was expecting to play right field. I know Weidman can play either corner outfield spot. Savoy, he can catch and play the outfield. Part of what took so long to get right field figured out this year was because the guys that were getting the opportunities were kind of struggling. Not so much that they couldn't play right field. It was more about them struggling at the plate. McClatty got off to a horrid start there in Arlington. Then he started coming on and getting more opportunities, and then he started having mental lapses. Pacetta just never could get it going at the plate, and then he ends up getting hurt, missing the rest of the year. And I think Crichton is kind of who he is at this point. He's very streaky, but I would expect that outfield to have 3 new faces in it next year. So again, like I mentioned earlier, I don't know where Crichton kind of fits in. It's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out. Do I think Coastal has a chance of winning the CWS? Yes, absolutely, man. This Coastal team's different than some of these good teams they've had in the past, 5, 6, 7 years. For most years, that's a team that hits the ball real well, but the pitching's more on the mediocre side. That's not the case this year. They've got the arms, man. That's a very good hitting team and a team with some pitchers that can shut it down for you. I think they've got as good a shot as anybody in this thing, man. And they, you need to start out with a win, and that's what they did. It's certainly, I wouldn't sit here and say they're gonna win it by any stretch. I'm not gonna go that far, man, but I think they're certainly capable. I mean, that's a team that's won 25 in a row now or something like that. I forget the certain number, but they've won a lot of games in a row, man. No pitchers. I didn't say there were no pitchers. Now they've added 2. One of them from Alabama, and he's a flamethrower, man. He's everybody wants these power arms. Well, you got one in him. The only thing is, I think he threw less than 4 innings last year, and he had more walks than he did innings pitched. But again, it's a very small sample size. He was just a sophomore. He's got 2 more years left, and they got the kid from Catawba, which is a Division II school, and he's absolutely, his numbers are impressive. He has 16 saves. He led the country in 16 saves. In fact, he's got 2 years left, 3.36 ERA. He can come in and kind of take the place of Malstead, maybe. Now, I just want to see a couple more, man. One more starter and one more high leverage reliever. Because as we all saw this year, just because a guy puts up good numbers somewhere else. Doesn't mean it's going to translate once he gets into the ACC. We saw it with a couple of Big Ten guys on that roster this year. I think I touched on this last week. If you go back and look at Bakich's last two portal classes, the upperclassmen he brings in, they tend to have a lot of success. Last year when he brought in some underclassmen, the adjustment period was readily apparent. So we'll see how these pitchers, make that adjustment. Bendy's with me. He wants more arms too. I hear you, brother. Maybe the defensive end strategy is to load up the 27 class, take another transfer if need. You can get that's absolutely something you can do. You can always take another transfer if you need to, because I certainly wouldn't count on TJ Parker being back, for 27. But I mean, we all have now seen Dabo will go do it if he feels like he needs to, and I'd still feel a lot better, if you hit on right and decide you're going to stay put there after missing on Quinn, if that's what happens. It's not a terrible class, man. I think the Hardrick kid's probably a little underrated, although he's not a plug and play guy. He's a guy that's going to need some development, but you still have guys like, Watford and Darian Mayo. I'm probably forgetting somebody, but there's still a couple of young pass rushers on that team. And you got Will Helt, still got a couple more years of eligibility. So, I mean, if you get two in this class, I'd prefer to see him land three. That'd be my preference just because the Hardrick kid's not a plug-and-play guy. He's probably going to need a year, maybe two. But if you land two and decide you want to bring in a portal guy, you can go that route too. So, I mean, it's not like it's going to be the end of the world if they just end up with two in this class. But we'll see, what they do in the 27 class. Let's see here. I thought I had it pulled up, but I do not. See if I can get it pulled up right quick. Let's see. They've only offered two true edge rushers, DJ Jacobs and Seth Tillman. One of those guys is one of the top 5 players in the class. So, I mean, we'll see what happens with the offers have kind of trickled out here for 27 so far. But if you don't get what you want in 27, and depending on what you do in the portal, you can absolutely take an extra in 20. I mean, if you don't get what you want in 26 and, you decide not to go get somebody out the portal, you can absolutely make up for it in 27. Atkinson isn't coming here. Yeah, I kind of lean towards that too. But again, I still understand. You don't give up on him yet. And Atkinson is a guy that he does not let much out publicly. He doesn't even tell you what school he's going to take an official visit to until a couple of days ahead of time. He announces it the week of, unlike these other kids who put out a schedule, although a lot of them change it, after they put the initial one out. But he puts them out one at a time. He plays things very close to the vest. It's hard to know what he's telling some of these coaches behind the scenes. So we'll see. But yeah, I kind of lean towards thinking he ends up somewhere else too. But as I've said before, man, it's you got to pat Ben Bower on the back just for getting Clemson back into the fold with that guy, because they were an afterthought with him in January. How will Dabo use the Roy bus when it seems Clemson will be top 10 in every preseason ranking? What'd he do before he came up with that term? Yeah, I mean, that's there's all different ways you can go about using to motivate your team. You don't have to lean on the same, the, I'm gonna call it tired term, every season. Dabo's pretty creative in that regard too, so he'll probably come up with something new. But um, there, there's been a lot of times Clemson's gone into the season inside the top 10. Um, you don't have to go with the Roy Bus analogy, man. You can come up with something else. I wouldn't worry about that one too much. Love to see Titsworth. Me too. I think he's more of a reliever than a starter at this level, at least right now. Um, you know, if you're in a pinch and you need a starter, he's fine for a spot starter. What we saw him this year, but I think he can be more effective as a reliever. Absolutely, 100%. With O'Brien more than likely going Penn State or Notre Dame, I think they take another safety in the class. If they miss on O'Brien, I think they'll probably stick with what they got. And I think they've got two pretty good ones. In Anderson and Gephardt, man, I really like both those guys. Absolutely, actually. Got to talk with Gephardt a little bit back in the spring a couple of times. Man, he's a really good kid. I got to meet Anderson when he on his announcement day. He's and talked to his mom for a little while too. Those are two pretty good kids that seem to fit what Clemson's looking for. But even more so, man, I just think they both bring a level of physicality to that defensive backfield. But to your point, yeah, I think they'll probably, I wouldn't be shocked if they targeted a third, but I lean towards thinking they'd probably stick with the two. Is Uribe a good backfield for prep? Yeah, I don't really know that much about him, other than the fact I think he came from Furman, maybe. I have to look into that some more. So I don't really, I think Green was a big loss for the basketball program, though. So those are pretty big shoes to fill. I'll say that much. Is Tate Reynolds the real deal? I'm high on Tate Reynolds, man. Anybody that's watched this show knows that. I think he's got a lot of upside. Probably not a plug and play guy. I wouldn't say it's impossible, but probably not. Probably a need a year. But that kid took a huge jump from his sophomore season to his junior season. I think he'll take another jump, as he goes through his senior season. There's a reason why he's been, made it to the Elite 11 finals, because he's got a lot of the tools, man. He's a dual threat guy, man. He's kind of built like a tank. His thighs are, man, they're like tree trunks. But he moves around really well. I remember the first time I saw him when he was coming up to camp last summer. I didn't know who he was at first. I just assumed he was a linebacker, with his size. But man, I think he's a guy with a lot of upside. It's been quiet recently with Jay Lamar. Do you think our current depth is scaring backs away? I don't know why it would, to be quite honest. You got Gideon, but outside of that, you've got Adam Randall, who's going to be gone after this year by the time any 2026 back gets there. And outside of him, you got EZ, who hasn't really, shown anything yet, although, he's a guy I think's got a lot of upside. But behind him, you got guys that have been there for multiple years now and not been able to get on the field outside of Jay Haynes, and he's coming off a torn ACL, and I personally don't see him as an every down back. So I don't know why, the depth would be scaring anybody away. Um, I tend to think Lamar's probably a guy that's going to end up heading elsewhere. Clemson decided to take their swings with Baker and Lamar, and couldn't even get Baker on campus for an official visit. But we'll see what they do after, if they do indeed miss on Lamar. We'll see who they target. I know C.J. Spiller went and watched C.J. Givers during the spring. He did not come and work out at camp this summer, though, but he's a guy that Spiller's kind of left the door open with, doesn't have an offer. And they've only offered Baker and Lamar and Mallory and McGill, if you want to count him, but he reclassified to 25. But yeah, I don't know that it's – I don't think it's the competition, though. I don't see why it would be. Most teams these days, you need at least 2 running backs, and whoever Clemson signs here in 26, if it's a good one, man, he'll have an opportunity to get on the field sooner rather than later. No, Wentworth does not just want to be a pitcher. If he wanted to just be a pitcher, he probably would have stayed at Clemson. What's buzz with Reynolds and his camp hype for the Elite 11? Obviously, a lot with this upcoming season, but thoughts on Vizina versus an incoming freshman? I'll say what I've said in the past. Dabo's extremely loyal to his guys that have been loyal to him. So Vizina's going to get all the opportunity in the world to win that job when it comes open, after Cade leaves this year. Vizina's kind of the rare breed in college athletics these days, particularly in football. The guy has stuck around for 3 years as a quarterback. He wasn't like this big 5-star guy coming out of high school, but he was a solid 4-star who, a lot of other schools wanted. And he just chose to stick around for 3 years. And Dabo's going to reward that loyalty by giving him every shot to lock up the job. If it's me and I'm Tate Reynolds, when I get here, next January, and that job's wide open, I'm coming in here to win that thing. Now, I don't know if he's capable of winning it. Again, I think he might need to be a guy that needs a year. He's also told me he plans to play baseball for at least a year. That probably wouldn't start until the baseball season after his first football season, so he'd be able to go to the spring and stuff. But I think it's going to be a fun competition either way, and if you land Peyton Houston and he gets here in January of 27, geez, man, that'll be fun to watch that play out. But I do think Vizina's kind of an unknown commodity because we've really not seen a lot of him, not enough to make a logical, not enough to draw a logical conclusion. Anyways, I did like what I saw out of him during the spring game this year. I thought he looked like a guy that was in the midst of taking a big step developmentally, as opposed to what he looked like in the spring game a year ago. He still kind of looked lost at times. He didn't look like that this year. He looks like a guy that had complete command of the offense, the big arm. So we'll see what happens. But my guess is Vizina will win that job. I just lean towards thinking Tate Reynolds is a guy that's going to need a year. College football playoff committee is looking at more outsiders for input on strength schedule calculations. My inner cynic says the result will favor power two, even though some think it's aimed for the. Yeah, everything they do is going to be aimed for the power two to have an advantage, and nobody will ever convince me otherwise. All right, here's two about Gaffney. What happened with Gaffney? He didn't get much playing time at the end. Is Gaffney being groomed as JJ's replacement? Isn't Savoy a catcher? Yes, Savoy is a catcher. I can't even sit here and tell you for sure that JJ will be back next year. He's draft eligible. If he gets drafted, maybe he decides to head off to MLB, and all this is moot. But if he's back, I think he's your catcher. I'm not a big fan of Gaffney behind the plate personally, especially not full time. As for what happened to him at the end of the year, Bakich had said he had tweaked a hamstring. That kind of contradicts something I was told. But we'll go with Bakich's side. He said he tweaked a hamstring. He ended up after the first game there up at Pitt, and he had kind of been hitting the ball all right. He had the most hits of anybody in the series before Pitt. I think that was Duke, maybe. And then he had one or two in the Friday game or the first game against Pitt. He was not going to play the second game against Pitt. And then they decided Gerald needed a day off and they put Gaffney in the catch. And that was the last time he started. He got another, I think he got another pinch hit or two. I know there was one against North Carolina. He might have got one in the, that last game, that blowout loss to Kentucky. Can't remember for sure, but Bakich said he tweaked a hamstring. I do remember their very first game in Durham in the ACC tournament, which was on a Wednesday. He was taking infield, and he certainly didn't look like a guy with a tweaked hamstring to me. He was going wide open. But that's what we'll go with, since that is what the head coach said. And, again, it's easy to get down on that kid, man, but he's a guy that's making the jump from the Big Ten to the ACC, and he's still, he was just a sophomore last year. The guy still got 2 more years. I think particularly in baseball, we think if a guy doesn't light it up or do it as a freshman, man, we kind of start to write him off, and I think that's the wrong road to travel. What happened to the Florence Morning News? I heard this weekend it was gone or stopped covering local news and high school sports. I have not heard that. Scott Chansey's the sports editor there, has been for a long time. They cover a lot of high school stuff. If they are gone, it's new. Saw him at a bunch of high school games last fall. That is the print media here. It has been forever. But I have not heard anything about it being gone. No, that would be news to me. Does Coastal have much of an NIL pool for players? Remarkable what they did with so little. If they don't have I don't really know what they have to work with NIL wise for baseball. I would imagine they got to have at least a little bit, to have some of those pitchers they've got there, because generally speaking, pitchers aren't cheap, particularly good ones. But I really can't. I don't know. I don't really know anybody plugged in over there at Conway. And hadn't really heard, but kudos to that guy, man. However he did it, he put together a heck of a roster this year. We have 2 talented safeties already committed. Any thoughts on potentially adding Joey Bryant? If you add him, that give you one heck of a safety haul at safety, that's for sure. I lean towards thinking he'll probably end up heading elsewhere. We'll see what happens. He's one of those guys that's set to announce here soon. I forget what the date is specifically in the next week or two. It might be next week. I think it's June, toward the end of June, but if you do miss on him, like I said earlier, and you just stick with Anderson and Gephardt, I think you got 2 really good players there. I am high on both those guys. Bakich should know the caliber of B1G player. Well, I mean, I don't want to be misconstrued here and say there are no good baseball players in the Big Ten, because that's not what I'm saying. But I do think it's a little naive to pretend like there's no jump in competition. The Big Ten baseball is different than ACC baseball or different than SEC baseball, and I think everybody knows it. But that's not to say that guys who start out in the Big Ten can't transfer down to the ACC schools or SEC schools and have some success. I just think that with some of those guys, there might be a little bit of a learning curve. Again, I've said this plenty of times too. I don't remember anybody questioning those moves before the season started. We all thought they were pretty good moves, and it just turns out both those guys, there was a learning curve for both of them. Took them a while to adjust. I think they worked on and probably had some issues with that all season. Although, if you look at Colin Priest's numbers overall, if you just look at his numbers in ACC play, they weren't terrible. He hit like 280. I think all but 3 or 4 of his home runs came in ACC play. But then, what he's going to really be remembered for is, once the postseason started there in Durham in the ACC tournament and then in the regional, he struggled mightily. And Gaffney was a guy that, he tend to hit a single or nothing. Just the power he had, in the Big Ten did not translate down to the ACC, at least not yet anyways. But again, both those guys, they're still underclassmen. They're still developing. I think it's too early I think it's way too early to write either of those guys off. Any word on Jay Haynes' progress? I haven't really heard anything about him. We'll find out soon enough. We'll probably get an update on him within a month, maybe 5 weeks. We're not that far from the ACC kickoff, man. The Clemson will probably do their big media event. They usually do it right before the ACC kickoff, so it'll probably be 3 weeks into July, something like that. And we'll get an update on him then. But we're talking about a guy that tore his ACL in December. We'll see where he is when they start practicing. That's kind of putting him right on the line. But with running backs, sometimes it takes them a little while to get back to trusting those knees fully after they tear an ACL. So we'll see what happens with him. Where does Cole Turner fit in the receiver rotation? I don't know, man. I think that's a good question. he's kind of, I always call Tyler Brown the forgotten man in that room because he was hurt all last year and nobody ever talks about him anymore after the emergence of Wesco and TJ Moore and the season Antonio had and him coming back for his senior campaign. But, man, there's only one ball, and they've got, they brought Tristan Smith in to kind of add a little juice to that room. Even though you lost Adam Randall to the running back position, he was a guy that wasn't getting many reps at receiver anyways over the back half of the season. So, I mean, there's only one ball, and there's only so many snaps to go around. I've always thought that Cole could be a good complementary piece, not a guy you want to see starting, for at a school like Clemson anyways. And that sounds like I'm knocking him, and I don't mean to, because I do think he has a skill set that can help you. He's one of the fastest guys on the team. He's a good route runner. He can go up and get a ball. He's already proven all that stuff. So, I mean, I expect him to have a role, but I expect it to be in a complementary role, so to speak, a secondary role. He's not going to be one of the guys running out there first, but he'll probably be rotated in. We'll see if he gets more than a couple hundred snaps. That's kind of about where I see it, 250 snaps, something like that. That's assuming everybody stays healthy for the most part too. Do I still feel pretty good about Perry Wright? Yeah. Although I do think, he late last week, he put it out there that he's going to, make his announcement in Las Vegas. This is a guy that goes to Buford in Georgia now. That did cause me to raise my eyebrows. But I have not heard anything to change my opinion on him. I still think he ends up being a part of the class. Las Vegas or not. I think, he was with Dre Quinn at Texas this weekend, and I want to say he goes to Texas A&M this weekend. And then, hold on a minute, I can tell you, as long as my laptop here doesn't die. I didn't charge it before we got started. He is a guy that's supposed to commit shortly after he takes his last official. July 2nd, 3rd, 4th, something like that. Hold on a minute, and I'll tell you for sure. And he's a guy that I am now firmly considering a defensive end. July the 4th. July the 4th for Perry Wright. My thoughts on Cade versus Tate coming out of high school. I think Cade's more polished right now. If not right now, but if you compare where Cade was coming out of his junior year, which is where Tate is right now, or let's say going into his senior year, I think Cade is the more polished player. Cade played in what some would call the toughest division in all of high school football. And the guy never lost a game. Never. They won back-to-back state titles while he was a starter. Might have been 3. I can't remember if he started as a sophomore or not. He had some epic performances there at Westlake. So that would be the first thing I say. But Cade was also a guy that needed a year. He looked like he was the guy that first start there against North Carolina, or not start, but when he came in and took over for DJ against North Carolina in Charlotte that night and lit up the Tar Heels, and everybody's so high on him. And then he kind of struggles the next year, struggles mightily at times. So that's part of why I think Tate's going to need at least a year. I'm not saying it's impossible for him to come in there. I mean, he might go out and prove that he's taken that big of a jump as a senior, but as we sit here today, I think he's probably a guy that's going to need a year. Plus, he also, he's a full-time two-sport guy, man. He's really just started devoting, I shouldn't say all of his attention, but as much attention as he does on football. Here, just a few years ago, he was always a baseball first guy. And again, he plans to play baseball. He told me for at least the first year while he's in college. So he's going to be kind of still, splitting time and learning two sports. So I would definitely put Cade as the more polished player coming out of high school. But man, if you watch Tate play and watch his film, and I got to watch him work out at camp last year, he's got the tools, man. He's just got to, I think a big part of it with Cade was too, the game was real fast for him. He needed to just get out there and kind of take his lumps that first year and let everything kind of slow down for him. I think, I think Lenore Sellers was experiencing some of that at South Carolina last year too. You're so good at the high school level, man, and you don't realize how big of a jump it is from high school to college till you actually get on the field and the live bullets start flying because you can't really replicate it in practice. Some guys, I think it just takes some time for the game to slow down for them, and I think Tate will probably be one of those guys too. Coach Bakich is pulling in some good recruits. Who do you think is the biggest get so far? I really like the Savoy kid. It's hard for me to say I like one more than the others. I'm not. I really don't think. I think Wyman's probably going to get drafted. Matter of fact, he's at the Major League Draft Combine this week. I don't know. I mean, I can't say that he's definitely gone or anything like that, but the fact that he's at the Combine tells you he's got an interest in being drafted. So I wouldn't be shocked if he never makes it to campus. But I like a lot of those guys that have announced in the past week. I like the Savoy kid. I really like the Lichtenberger kid. And I like the Dally kid too. They all give you something the lineup really doesn't have at the moment. Lichtenberger gives you that, a guy you can put at the top that's going to get on base, and he can I think he can. I can't remember if he's not. I don't know if he's the guy that had a bunch of stolen bases or not, but he's got a little bit of speed. Then you got the Alley kid who's never hit less than 18 home runs in any of his 3 years at Mercer, and the Savoy kid who hit 20 this past year as a freshman. But he would probably be at the top of my list, the Savoy kid. I think he is I think he's got the makings to be a superstar. Talked about it earlier, man. He's had a real rough road, with some injuries and stuff while he was in high school, man. He's got to cheer for. Do you foresee Chris Denson threatening to win the starting QB job in 20? Nah, probably not. He's a guy that's still pretty raw. He's got a lot of talent, man. You can see it in the spring game, but there's still a lot of areas of his game that are still kind of raw, and he's gonna really benefit from redshirting this year, I think. But I don't know, man. I don't see him not that quickly. Maybe by the time Vizina is done, he could be ready to compete for the starting job, but I just don't see it being that quickly. Stranger things have happened, though. I mean, he'd have to take a humongous jump, this year, and that's kind of hard to do when you're redshirt and you're not getting a lot of reps. But I would lean more towards thinking once Vizina is done, maybe by then he'll be ready to roll. But there's a lot to like about him, man. He's fun to watch. He was fun to watch in the spring game. He's the left-handed guy. He can throw on the run and those kind of things, man. He can make something out of nothing. There's a lot of things I like about what he brings to the table. Think Gaffney still has a lot of potential. Will probably still be the starting first baseman next year. Really hoping for a miracle with Wideman making the campus. Yeah, I lean. I still think there's a lot of potential with both Gaffney and Priest. There's, it's hard to imagine the trajectory being anything but upward with those guys. I just think they needed a period of adjustment, getting used to playing at this level, man. I think it's a pretty big jump. I think not all guys are built to handle it immediately, and it takes some time. And I think those two guys fall into that category. But yeah, it's way too. I don't think you should ever give up on an underclassman that has already shown the type of potential he has. Think Adam Randall is going to surprise a lot of people. I think he is a sleeper at running back. I think he's your starter day one. The question for me is how long can he hold off Gideon? For some running backs, particularly, it's the pass protections is where they take some time to pick some of those things up. I mean, it happened with ETN. That's why he wasn't starting as a freshman, over the first part of that year, because he struggled with pass protect. He struggled with it as a sophomore. There's a lot of that's going to depend on where Gideon is with that, but I think they're going to combine to give you a pretty good 1-2 punch. And if EZ takes the kind of jump, that you hope he takes between year one and year two, that's three pretty good backs. Watching EZ run in the spring, the only real critique I had was he still tended to run up too high, which makes it easier to poke the ball out. And I can still hear Dabo, yelling at him over the mic, man, about the ball security. But to me, that's kind of that and the pass protection with him too. It's probably the final things he's got to get over the hump with. But there's some, there's. I think you should have more depth this year there for sure. I think the move for Randall is going to end up being a good one. I just don't know that he's going to be able to hold off Gideon all year long. Because and that's not a knock on Randall. I just think Gideon's got that high of a ceiling. Any conference talk since lawsuit settlement? Not really. I think Clemson and Florida State got everything they wanted out of that. If you want to be out by the time the next set of television negotiations roll around, and this settlement allows you to get out by then. The penalty for leaving early goes way down. It'll be way down by the time 2030 rolls around, and that's kind of about 2030, 2031. That'll be when the Big Ten and the SEC are working on their next television contract, and that'll be about the time if you're gonna make a move, that'll be about the time you want to make it. And now you're in a position where you can afford to do that. But it'll probably be a little quiet on that front for the next year or so. It might ramp up back up around whenever those next television deals are due to kick in. They usually start working on them a couple of years in advance, so that might be when you start hearing some of that stuff again. Is Vezina just a miss or a bad fit? I don't know that we can say either yet. I just don't think we've seen enough of him to know that he's a miss. He's probably not the type of quarterback. If you look at the quarterbacks that Garrett Riley's recruited since he's been at Clemson, Vezina doesn't really fit that mold. But I think he would, he's not, I don't want to say he's a bad fit just because he doesn't fit the mold of the quarterback that Riley tends to target. Vezina's probably a better, more athletic runner than he gets credit for because he's so big. People think he's probably big and slow and kind of bulky moving, and he's really not, man. He moves fairly smoothly. He's probably a good bit quicker than most give him credit for, but I just think it's too premature to label him a bust or a miss or anything like that because he's just really not had the opportunity. He was always a guy. He got overhyped by a lot of fans on social media for whatever reason. Particularly last offseason when Cade's coming off his, up and down years, his first year as the full-time starter, all of a sudden you've got these fans, and there were a bunch of them, man. I saw it all the time on Facebook and Twitter, fans talking about how Vezina's going to beat Cade out. That I don't know where that stuff came from. That was never a topic of discussion with anybody I talked to up there. Nobody up there talked about Vezina possibly beating Cade out. That was always Cade's job. So I think he got a little bit too much hype too quick, at least from some people. But I don't know if you were at the spring game this year, and I know it wasn't televised, so if you weren't there, you didn't get to see it. But if you watched him in the spring game this year last year, and you were able to watch him in it this year, I think, there was a noticeable difference. I mean, he was a guy that looked much better. But again, it's just a spring game. That's why I still think he's kind of an unknown commodity at this point. I just don't know that we're going to have the answer to that until next year when it's his time. Could be a great QB room with Denson, Reynolds, Bradley, and Houston if it comes off. Yeah, I'm telling you, man, Houston kind of knocked my socks off the last weekend, man. He just absolutely killed it. And did it with all, facing all kind of travel issues the night before. I mean, like hellacious travel issues, man. I probably would have been ill as a hornet walking into that building Sunday morning in his shoes, but not him. He was smooth as silk. But he also told me that he could see himself committing at some point later this year. He said he might take a couple of game day visits or he might not. So this isn't one that's going to, or as we sit here right now, it doesn't appear to be one that's going to stretch into next year or next summer or anything. A lot of these schools like to have their quarterbacks locked up pretty quick. He's definitely a guy that, this doesn't mean he's going to end up at Clemson by any means, but he's one of those Clemson kind of guys. If you ever had the opportunity to talk to him, man, it jumps off at you pretty quick. Anyone on offense or defense you seem to think has the most potential to make more of noise come this fall? Maybe a backup that we aren't talking about much. If you want somebody that's not getting talked about much on offense, I guess I'd have to go with Bettinger, just because everybody else is just such a known commodity already. That's probably who I ride with. On defense, that's a good one. That's a good question. I think I'm gonna go with Vic Burley, man. I just think after 2 years and some bad luck from the injury standpoint, he's kind of fully healthy now and ready to kind of have that breakout season people have been waiting on for a while now. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and go with him. If we were to lead the ACC, how much of a chance is it we get into the SEC? Yeah, I don't know, man. When you look at some of the things that Clemson has done behind the scenes, in the last 2-3 years or whatever, it just everything kind of screams Big Ten. You look at the sports they've added, the veterinary school and some of the stuff they're trying to improve on the academic side. It just kind of screams Big Ten, but I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks there's actually a big part of me that thinks we're all kind of maybe looking at this the wrong way. And maybe instead of trying to look through the lens of the current landscape, we need to imagine what the future landscape's going to look like and try to envision it in that regard. Because I think we're headed for a total breakaway from the NCAA. I mean, I've said it plenty of times on here. You probably heard me say it yourself. I think there's going to be, the Big Ten, the SEC, and maybe not all of those schools, but at least most of them. And then, some other schools are going to head off and go do their own thing. They're going to end up calling the players employees. We're going to get to some collective bargaining, and we're going to have a lot more stable of a product than we do right now. Does that come as soon as, the next set of television negotiations? Maybe, maybe not. I would probably lean towards thinking the ones after that, but I do think we're headed that way. Because this landscape right now is just not sustainable. It's just not. There are no rules. Boosters are going to get tired of paying out all this money at a certain point with no return on their investment. And I don't care if you're a booster at Alabama and you fork out a bunch of money and they win the national title this year, man, there's no return on that investment, really. You're just kind of giving it away, and you can't even write it off on your taxes anymore, if I'm remembering that right. But if we're talking about the current landscape, again, everything kind of screams Big Ten, but there's just, I don't know, there's just a part of me that believes that it'll end up being the SEC. And I don't base that off anything but just gut feeling, to be quite honest. But we shall see. Think Vizina has improved every year he's been here so far. I think it'll be interesting to see the QB next year with him and Denson and Tate coming in. I would agree with him having improved every year he's been here so far. You just don't know what you have with him because we've not been able to see it. We get to see him some in the spring game and then in very small windows in mop-up duty. And, you're not really seeing anything in mop-up duty, but mostly a guy handing the ball off. But yeah, I am kind of looking forward to when that day comes because, he's kind of been here, by then he'll have been here 3 years. He'll have sat and waited for 3 years. You just don't see quarterbacks doing that anymore. Again, I like to say it, man, all the time. He's kind of a rare breed. So that is at least one aspect of Cena that is pretty impressive. Because I guarantee you that he could have left this year and probably made more money somewhere else and had an opportunity to start. I'd bet almost anything on that. But I do agree with the fact that he's gotten better each year. I think that his biggest jump, came between 23 and 24. And I think he continued that trajectory in the spring earlier this year and showed that in the spring game. Also seeing the role Tristan Smith has this year. Yeah, Clemson likes to rotate those receivers in and out and keep them fresh. I think Tristan's going to have plenty of opportunity. I just don't think he's going to be a guy that runs out there first. And at the end of the day, everybody wants to start, but when you get down to it, man, it doesn't really matter who runs out there first, man. It matters how many snaps you play. And I think for those first six guys, Antonio, TJ Moore, Bryant Wesco, and I think those are your three starters. And then behind them, you got Tristan Smith, Tyler Brown. I think I'm forgetting somebody. Might be one more, but then Cole Turner too. But I think particularly with those first five guys I just named, I think there'll be plenty of opportunity for those fellas. This time next year, is the linebackers position going to be topic of discussion? I don't know. Might very well be. You'll have Sammy coming back. It'll be time for whoever they sign in this current class. They'll be here by then. Don't know who that's going to be yet. You got Woodaz's little brother, who some people are pretty high on. He's just unlike Wade. He needed a year or two. There's you got Kobe McLeod, who's coming back from the injury. You got D Creighton still there. I'm not one of these guys that thinks Jamal Anderson's going to have some epic career at Clemson just because he's a little undersized and based off unless they start going back to using a Sam or something. But a lot of that's going to depend on what the roster looks like at linebacker a year from now. We shall see. You'll know you have Sammy Brown. CV did look good in the spring game. Denson and CV both left the door open for him. Yeah, I thought both those guys showed a lot of potential that day. Absolutely. Ashton Hampton, Vic Burley popped this. The only reason I didn't go with Ashton Hampton because he said a guy that's not being talked about, and Hampton started some games last year, and he's projected to be the starter this year. That's the only reason I didn't go with him. Yeah, I think Hampton's going to have a breakout year, man. I think he's going to if you can get Terrell back to playing the way he played as a freshman and Hampton having the type of season I think he's going to have, that secondary could be really, really good. My prediction on the record at the end of the season, 12-0, 11-1, 10-2. I don't know, man. I never predict an unbeaten year. It's just so hard to go undefeated. If I had to guess right now, and I reserve the right to change this at any time. But just off the top of my head, I'm gonna go 11-1. I don't like the Friday night road game at Louisville. I don't know. Clemson's not had a lot of luck at times when they've had to play on Friday nights. It's not been kind to them at times in the past. That road game to Georgia Tech, I think that's one that could get a little tricky. Depending on, because man, they got a lot of pieces, man. He's got that guy there has got that program headed in the right direction. Now, whether they take that big jump this year or they need one more year, that's yet to be determined. But I think that's one to watch. I think Clemson's going to beat LSU, though. Again, I reserve the right to change my mind on that the closer we get. But that's the best answer I can give you at this point. I'm going to go 11-1. If I got to pick somebody they're losing to, I'm going to Friday night game in Louisville. How would I compare Sammy's brother to Sammy at the same point in high school? I think Max is going to be a really good player. And obviously, people comparing him to his older brother doesn't bother him at all, as evidenced by his very quick commitment to Clemson as soon as he got his offer. He doesn't care about any of that stuff, but I think he's got the makings to be a really good linebacker. Is he going to be a 5-star guy coming out of high school like Sammy was? Probably not. He's probably not going to be, as big as Sammy is. That's part of what makes Sammy the freak that he is, because he's so fast for as big and as powerful as he is. I think Max will probably be not quite what Sammy is from a, physique standpoint. But, man, I think he's got the makings to be a really good linebacker. And with that, I am going to bid you guys farewell. I want to thank our sponsors over at A-Glass, 2 locations right here in the PD, one in Florence, one in Sumter. Those guys can take care of all your auto glass needs. They do replacement. They do repair. Give them a call today, either location, or go online and get yourself a free quote, myaglass.com. If you have not hit that like button or if you're watching on YouTube and you've not hit that like button, please do so. It also wouldn't hurt our feelings if you hit that subscribe button. Want to appreciate everybody that tuned. I want to thank everybody that tuned in tonight. We very much appreciate it. A lot of content coming out on the site. I know it's kind of the dead season. Got a lot of recruiting stuff still to go. Like we talked about at the top, man, over the next week or so, there's going to be a lot of decisions rolling in. So check us out there, the Clemson Insider. And once the baseball portal kind of dies off, Ashby and myself are going to do one more baseball show, the portal edition. It'll probably be, next week or the week after. We hadn't decided on a date yet. We want to try to make sure they've made all the portal moves they're going to make before we do it, so we can talk about all of them. So be on the lookout for that. But we will see you guys next week right back here, 7 p.m.